There is nothing wrong with your radio.
Do not attempt to adjust the volume.
We are controlling the broadcast.
For the next hour we will control all that you hear.
You are about to experience the knowledge and insights of the Media Mothership.
Hi. Hello. Hi, everyone. You're listening to Media Mothership here on Edge Radio 99.3 FM, broadcasting, as always, out of Nipaluna, Hobart, Tasmania's wonderful Edge Radio studios here. Join us as we journey through the fascinating origins, narratives that drive and shape various media and pop culture phenomena. We're going to dive deep with Media Mothership as we uncover stories that have captivated audiences and influenced the entertainment landscape. I'm your host, Dr. Craig, joined, as always, by Lord Taylor.
Hello.
And now joined by special guest MC Dent.
Hello.
Excellent. So today's show, we're exploring the role of wrestling, WWE wrestling. And as always, we're streaming over edgeradio.org.au, as well as YouTube and Twitch. And you can find us by just searching Media Mothership. We're also contactable through the chat there or on the SMS line 0488
888.
Okay, 0488 11707. I'll try to keep an eye on that. So welcome. Gosh, I feel like I can never give myself enough time to prepare. It's like, 40 minutes goes by just like that. And I believe we've got audio. If anyone's listening on the stream, do let me know if we don't have audio. Let's jump straight in now. I'll play a... let's do a little bit of news in the world of wrestling. So the first story I want to go over, because I did a search of current stories or interesting things which are occurring. All right, so this one, Australian pro wrestlers Rhea, Ripley and Grayson Waller return home for our biggest WWE event in years. This was back in this story was back in 21st February 2024, ABC News. And it's highlighting two WWE women champions, Rhea Ripley and Grayson Waller.
Grayson Waller is not a women's champion. Grayson Waller is a man.
Oh, okay. Great.
These are the same person here.
Oh,
in the
right.
pictures. Yeah.
Oh, really? Is it the same person?
Yes.
Before and after she discovered the cure.
Yes, it's very Cure-esque in terms of the
makeup.
Robert
Smith, yes. With the lipstick,
Wow.
the makeup, and the wild black hair.
All right. So he's one of pro wrestlers, so Rhea Ripley and Grayson Waller. So who are these two people?
Rhea Ripley is from Adelaide originally, so I immediately assume you'd be a fan.
Adelaide boy?
She was I can't remember if she was the WWE Women's Champion or the Women's Heavyweight Champion, because those are two different titles. I believe she was the Heavyweight Champion. And she held the belt for roughly a year. And she's a member of the Judgment Day, which is a heel faction.
Heels are villains?
Heels are villains.
Yep.
So you cheer for faces or baby faces, and you boo for heels.
Oh, really? So the good guys are baby faces?
Baby faces or faces.
Wow. Yeah.
And even if you like the person, you boo for them.
Right. The kind of
heel.
theatrics of audience engagement requires that participation where do you often find yourself in that similar space? Like, will you boo the heel?
Not really, because people generally tend to. It's the same with movies and TV shows. We always like villains. We always like heels as well. So it's pretty rare to be actually, actively cheering a heel. Because I watch.
Yeah. So you will boo the heel.
Yeah. You don't. I watch pro wrestling with friends in a group setting. And we always cheer. We never really boo. We'll say, "Oh, come on!" If a pinfall gets broken when we thought that the match was over. But Rhea Ripley, she's very like this really gothic sort of metal routine, And although she was a heel for a while, she's sort of someone who acts like a heel, but people cheer for them because she had a very huge following. They're called a tweener because they go between face and heel. So she was honestly more of a tweener than a heel.
Right. Is there a narrative that helps pull the wrestlers in those directions in terms of, you know, she was redeemed by another wrestler, or...
Oh, no, she wasn't. It's not so much that she was redeemed. I mean, she has a friendship with Dominic Mysterio, who everyone absolutely despises. He is one of the greatest heels because everyone just hates him. His dad, Rey Mysterio, is one of the greatest faces ever. But essentially, he was her morality pet, if you will. But people just cheered for her because she's really tough, pulls off really cool moves, and is completely unrepentant. She just really enjoys what she's doing.
Morality pet.
Yes. So basically, it's from TV Trope. Sorry, I don't know if it's actually a real expression or not. But the idea is that it's someone who the character looks after, and in looking after them, the character becomes, you know, more likable.
Right. So what would be an example? It's not really Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker's not Obi-Wan Kenobi's morality pet, but
probably the most famous instance, if we're talking about pop culture, would be Piccolo and Gohan in Dragon Ball Z.
Ah, right, because Piccolo's a kind of bad guy.
Yes, he's initially still evil when he gets word that the Saiyans are going to invade, and so he kidnaps Gohan, who is at that point 4 years old, and trains him for a year. And in doing so, gets redeemed, and he becomes a good guy. And if we're going by wrestling parlance, he has a heel face turn because he's a bad guy, and then he turns into being a face. He becomes a good guy, so he has his heel face turn because of his friendship with Gohan.
Wow. Can you apply, it's interesting, isn't it? These kind of ways of decoding narrative structures. Do you reckon there's any real world experience? Like, I guess it doesn't really happen in workplaces where you can say to a colleague, you know, I think sometimes our relationship as a co-host to a host gravitate between heels and baby faces. So this, is her Australianness played up? Is the fact that she's Australian... Like, does she wear a Kuba?
No, she doesn't. She doesn't look like an Australian. She has that kind of, like, I guess that Australian bravado, but she's not ochre.
Is there any Australian ochre stereotype?
Not at the moment. There probably has been at some point in the past to some awful gimmick, probably from the early to mid '90s. No, not at this stage. Not at this stage. But the event that they're talking about, Elimination Chamber, is one of the major premium live events. They're called now. Used to be called pay-per-views, but now everything's a pay-per-view because you have. It's not a pay-per-view because you don't pay an individual fee to see that one on closed circuit broadcast. You just watch it on a streaming service. So they're now called premium live events.
Because Netflix. The big news, I guess, was Netflix picking up, or was it Netflix will stream WWE Raw in $5 billion deal. This was announced back in end of January 2024. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about, where a streamer like Netflix will have matches or specific things. Do you know much about the Netflix WWE Raw deal? Was that big news in the wrestling?
The thing that surprised me is that Raw and SmackDown, so they're both the weekly TV series that the WWE has. They're going to different streaming services, I believe. Whereas at the moment, everything is on Binge right now, which makes it very simple to watch.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. So Binge really is one of the core.
Yeah.
Taylor, what do you feel about the Australian pro wrestlers Rhea Ripley and Grayson Waller?
Well, I don't know who Grayson is. I've only watched a couple of ones, and the ones that I have watched have been free ones on YouTube. Usually released by the WWE channel, but sometimes not. I saw a couple of her matches. She's a good wrestler.
One of the really unique things about the whole heel and face phenomenon is that often wrestlers who are not from the US, even if they're a heel in the US, they'll be a face elsewhere.
Yes. So
she was definitely treated as a face during Elimination Chamber when she wrestled against Nia Jax, who is, I think she's also sort of a tweener. But for me, there was absolutely no tension because it was a month out from WrestleMania, and it was so obvious that Rhea Ripley was not going to lose the match in her home country when she could be built up. And the winner because the Elimination Chamber, the purpose of that pay-per-view was to see who's going to challenge for the title. And Becky Lynch, who's one of the very biggest stars, one of the biggest women's stars ever, won that. I just thought they're not going to throw away Rhea Ripley versus Becky Lynch at WrestleMania 40, and Rhea Ripley is not going to lose in her home country.
Does the Australian demographic have much, or market have much of a significance in the global WWE fan base? Is Australia seen as a kind of emerging audience, kind of entrenched? Or
I'd say emerging is probably a really good way to describe it, because I think 5 or 6 years ago they had Super Showdown at the MCG, which is the first time they had a really major pay-per-view in Australia. And this was the second time they've had, a premium live event. And this was in Western Australia at Optus Stadium. So hopefully there's some scope for them to keep on coming back, because it'd be great to be able to see these events live. Actually at the venue. Because about 15 years ago, sort of 2009, around the tail, after Ric Flair had quote-unquote retired, he retired from the WWE. Ric Flair, one of the biggest wrestlers of the 80s, at that point, in his 60s, I believe, because he's about 74 now, so sorry, late 50s, early 60s. He and Hulk Hogan did a tour called the Hulk Hogan Tour, because Hogan at that point was not affiliated to any, specific company. So he basically did a tour around major Australian cities called the Hulk Hogan Tour, where he essentially just
Australian cities.
Yeah.
Wow. It
was only in Australia, and it was just him beating up Ric Flair every night. Right, I think they wrestled 4 times, and Ric Flair did the job every night. Ric Flair didn't win once. It's like, I guess I get that people are going to see Hogan, but at the same time, have some variety.
And why wouldn't there be variety, you think? What would the benefit be? Just that it does play into heavily the brand recognition of Hulk Hogan as a babyface.
There's a rumor that Hulk Hogan doesn't sleep with bed sheets because he's so scared of being covered by anything. He does. Hogan is extremely reluctant to take a loss.
Right.
And he has creative control written into all of his contracts. And his catchphrase that gets bandied around, I don't think it's ever been spoken on an actual show, but everyone knows it from backstage discussions, is where if someone wants him to lose, he doesn't want to, he says that doesn't work for me, brother. But this tour ended up being a complete and total fizzer. Like
the Ripley and one, or the
Hulk Hogan
one.
Hulk Hogan one in 2009 was a fizzer. No one went to see it.
Really?
I think the venues were at best like 50% capacity. He had the option to release a DVD of it, but because no one went to see it, he actually refused to. So they recorded these matches.
Oh my gosh!
They professionally recorded these matches that cannot be legally released because Hogan doesn't want to do it because he's so upset that they did so badly. But Rhea Ripley versus Nia Jax at Elimination Chamber in February, people loved that. They were 110% behind Ripley and making so much noise.
Wow. So there definitely is an audience, but why did the Hogan thing not succeed? Do you think? Why was it only 50% attended?
Probably because it was a bunch of past their prime wrestlers who people were not interested in at that point. But I think, we transitioned from that to Super Showdown around 2018, which I think packed out the MCG. Actually, no, it did, because that's actually got the record for the most people seeing a WWE match.
An Australian event.
Yeah, because the MCG just holds a bigger capacity than most of the venues they normally perform in.
Right. So even though, you'd have a huge audience base, of course, in the States. However, typically they're not performing in these huge stadiums of large capacity. It just so happened, the MCG, big capacity, so it could fill everyone in. Wow, what a claim to fame. Australia's WWE, because there's not really much of a local, there is a local wrestling scene. Obviously, did Rhea Ripley work her way through the local Australian scene probably, and then...
She would have, I don't know what her story is, but she certainly would have trained as a wrestler in Australia before making the jump to go and, seek greener pastures. Because it's next to impossible to make a living it's almost impossible to make a living as a pro wrestler in America, let alone in Australia where we don't have, major companies.
Fascinating. Yeah. So again, that was earlier this year that event happened. And I guess one of the more recent bits of news as well is the fact that in Australia now you can pay to watch wrestling on a stream service like Binge, or YouTube is quite freely available. I know before we start getting into some of the granularity of wrestling, with a couple of lists counting the best and most interesting wrestling. There are spaces, if you're interested in wrestling, to engage with these days on YouTube that are kind of curated, which give people nice, introductions into the world of professional wrestling as well. Do you guys watch any particular YouTube channels that are portals into the world of wrestling?
Oh, far and away my favorite wrestling YouTube channel is called Wrestling Bios, where it's done by a guy from Northern Ireland, and it essentially started because for anyone familiar, between 1995 and 2001, WWF, which is now WWE, they started Monday Night Raw in the early 1990s. Their main competitor was WCW World Championship Wrestling, which was run by Ted Turner. And Turner basically said to his head of booking, Eric Bischoff, how do we beat WWF? And Bischoff said, give me primetime Monday night. And that became the Monday Night Wars, where WCW and WWF would air their shows at the same time every single week. And often that included taking shots at each other. There's one very unique, because normally when a wrestler wants to call out another wrestler, they do what's called a promo, where they basically do this piece to camera. And during the Monday Night Wars, Bischoff and a wrestler called X-Pac. So X-Pac was on WWF, and he would call out Eric Bischoff on another channel, who was another corporation altogether, who was with WCW, and Eric Bischoff was calling out Vince McMahon, the head of WWF, to come and fight him while he was on a WCW show. It was absolute madness. But basically, what this guy does,
that'd be like Superman from DC directly talking to in my head. Like Captain America from Marvel, right? Yeah. Just that.
So imagine
different companies, they're competitors, they're hostile against each other, but here we have the creatives wanting to.
So imagine Superman calling out Captain America in a DC comic, and Spider-Man calling out Superman in a Marvel comic, and people think maybe there will be some crossover, and so they keep on buying and getting invested. But there was never any crossover until the very end of 2001. Well, the start of 2001, really? Where there was never any crossover because eventually WCW went out of business, and McMahon, in charge of WWF, he just bought the company and imported a bunch of wrestlers over and then proceeded to completely demolish them because he hated them so much.
Well, I guess that's the other bit of news that's come out recently, the backlash against, is it McMahon, who was caught up now in a legal case regarding sexual misconduct. Right.
Essentially running a sex trafficking ring within WWE, and also he was a serial predator.
And those allegations are going to court.
I'll just finish that first thought quickly. So I watched basically what this guy does, Wrestling Bios, is every week he watches an episode of WWF and the corresponding episode of WCW, and he compares them with each other. But to answer your question about McMahon, so what they did was absolutely brilliant damage control, because they wanted to take as much heat off of that as they could. So McMahon is a workaholic. He employed his children to be really higher ups, or he'd never see them. So Stephanie McMahon, his daughter, is married to a longtime wrestler called Triple H, who is now he basically ran the developmental division of WWE called NXT. Everyone thought it was terrific. It was better than the main product. So Triple H, since McMahon has been stood down, he's been elevated to doing the main booking for the main roster of WWE. And then one of the very first things that happened was that The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, bought major shares and became a member of the board. So they essentially brought The Rock back in around the time all this while I was in McMahon to do everything they could to divert attention away from McMahon.
And The Rock, of course, we're talking his enormous kind of pop culture celebrity status today has been brought in with his roots, of course, in wrestling. And would you say succeeded in terms of...
This is another story in and of itself. It's brilliant because, so the end of WrestleMania... So WrestleMania 40 was this year, 2024. WrestleMania 39 was last year, 2023. That had Cody Rhodes, who is essentially the main... He's been the main face of the company for about 18 months now. He challenged Roman Reigns, the main heel, who at that point had held the belt for 3 years, and he lost. And so there was a lot
The heel lost?
The face lost.
Right.
So the good guy lost, the bad guy won, but that was to set up their rematch at WrestleMania 40. And Roman Reigns, the top heel, who was at that point was the champion, is The Rock's cousin. And so there was all this build-up to Cody Rhodes coming back and redeeming himself and avenging his loss and beating Roman Reigns and ending Roman Reigns' reign of terror. And then after Cody Rhodes had won an event called the Royal Rumble, which guarantees you a shot at a title, he, for some reason, just randomly on the following Raw, forfeits that and gives The Rock the opportunity to challenge.
Rock?
When The Rock hadn't wrestled a match in something like 12 years. And The Rock is so tone deaf and so wrapped up in his own ego. In real life, in real life, he thought that he could just waltz in and everyone would love him interrupting the story that they'd been building for the last 18 months.
So you feel behind the scenes, this was a call by The Rock and the
Yes.
team to say, and because obviously, at that point they wanted Rock on the board.
Yep.
And it provides, as you're saying, damage management for the McMahon scandal and court case. And that it seems, very cluey. But then The Rock insists on inserting himself back into wrestling, as you're saying, after 12 years. So
people got hashtag We Want Cody as the number one tweet trending on X.
Really?
They had a press conference about a month or so before WrestleMania where The Rock came out and everyone was booing him and chanting, so Jimmy's a member of the Bloodline, he's a bad guy, Jey Uso's a good guy, he splintered off. So Jimmy Uso does a run-in, and then you hear Jay's music, he runs in and he just tosses Jimmy into the audience, solves that problem. Then another member of the Bloodline comes in, Solo Sikoa. He's got history with John Cena, who was everyone like... He's got the meme about how he's invisible. Right. He's in a whole bunch of high-profile things these days, like Peacemaker and Suicide Squad. And he was the biggest wrestler of the 2000s, rather. And he's got history with Solo Sikoa. So his music hits after absolutely no hint he was going to be there. Everyone lost their mind. He throws in, yeets Solo Sikoa.
So John Cena does appear.
He appeared, and he basically knocked out Solo. Actually, it was hilarious because one of the biggest cliches in a WWE match is someone getting put through the Spanish announcer's desk.
Oh, the Spanish announcer does. And this guy's a Spanish announcer for the Spanish audience.
Yes. And so in every major event, someone gets put through that table. So my friends and I, when we were watching it, as soon as they introduced the Spanish announcer at the start of the whole night, when it's still light outside, we're like, so when's someone going through the Spanish announcer's desk? And there were build-ups to it, and they teased it. And so the actual moment was near the very end. John Cena does a run-in on Cody Rhodes' match with Roman Reigns and puts Solo Sikoa through the Spanish announcer's desk. We were on our feet and cheering when he was knocking all the stuff off it. We were like, someone's finally going through the Spanish announcer's desk.
The Spanish announcer, I love that.
And then it was so overbooked. And then The Rock came in. He squares up with John Cena because they've got history. They've main evented 2 WrestleManias back to back as rivals. The audience starts chanting "Holy poop!" Only they don't say poop, and they start chanting "Holy poop! Holy poop!" Rock hits Cena with a rock bottom, one-shots him, and he takes off his belt, and there's a run-in from Seth Rollins, and he just gets completely smacked away by Roman Reigns, and everyone is just waiting for something to happen. Cody Rhodes is on his knees. The Rock is about to whack him with his weight belt. There's a gong. The lights go out. Everyone loses their minds. The lights come up, and then there's the Undertaker. Undertaker, who's been one of the major faces in the company for about 30 years, is standing right behind The Rock. The Rock turns around, gets hit with a choke slam. There's a gong. The lights go out. The lights come back up, and Rock and Undertaker are both gone.
Wow!
It was such a cool moment because we absolutely lost our minds in it, because everyone had been expecting that The Rock's main rival from the early 2000s, Stone Cold Steve Austin, was going to be there. So we were waiting because his entrance music starts with breaking glass. We were expecting the glass to shatter and Stone Cold to come in and hit The Rock with his finishing move. And no, it's The Undertaker, actually. I was like, whoa, this is so much better. We weren't expecting this.
Yes. Wow. So they must have incredible secrecy control.
Absolutely.
Like the ability to keep all that quiet.
Yeah.
And have the talent somehow, I guess, close by. But
it was actually brilliant because they'd had the Hall of Fame induction ceremony in the same city the night before. So all the talent who were part-timers or retired, they were in the area anyway.
Yeah.
So it was very easy for them to just rock up and do a cameo.
Like I watched the making of We Are the World, and that came together, We Are the World, right? That's the one, the fundraiser for Africa. We are the world.
Yeah, that was for to feed the starving kids in Africa.
And the reason why that got pulled off was because it was held on the Grammys, the night of the Grammys. So they had all the talent together in that place, and then they could, get them together to record. So just like Sorry, weird analogy.
Let's go to the YouTuber that I watch.
Oh yes.
So the one that I watch is called Maven.
Maven.
Maven. He's I don't know anything about him in the actual scene. Do you know Marcus?
I don't watch Maven.
No.
Is
Don't
that
watch Maven.
politically? Marvin is just...
No, I just never heard of him.
Oh, okay. Yes, so Marvin.
Maven Huffman.
Huffman.
And he's got a really good YouTube show, and basically he talks about all of the secrets that he knows and all of that stuff that happened when he was part of it. And he said that basically in every single event, everyone that's currently signed with the company, everyone goes to that event no matter what, because they always get paid no matter what as well.
Right. Yeah. So again, that idea of the theatrics, almost like, actors being in part of a studio and being able to be brought in. All right, so we have some video to play. So if we go to the best WrestleMania matches of all time. So we're talking a little bit about WrestleMania. What is WrestleMania?
So WrestleMania is the main premium live event, formerly called a pay-per-view, where basically you have a whole bunch of matches that normally TV matches only go for a few minutes, and they're usually they're not that special. They end in a disqualification with surprising frequency, and generally you don't see many title changes. A premium live event happens every couple of months at a major event, so people pay money to see it at home and in person. And WrestleMania was the first really big one that they had, the very first big pay-per-view in the mid 1980s. There's something like 8 major recurring premium live events these days. But that's the really big one, usually where major feuds get resolved. And that was which is exactly what happened when Roman Reigns, he lost the belt to Cody Rhodes this year. Cody Rhodes beat him in the middle of the ring. After all that interference, they've set up The Rock coming back next year, most likely, because he's still the main villain. Right. And everyone appreciates him as a villain. Everyone thought it was his best work ever. But yeah, WrestleMania is where the really big feuds come to an end, and it's the most watched premium live event every year.
So this is a list from Den of Geek talking about the best WrestleMania matches of all time to celebrate WrestleMania 40. So this was the one this year. We take a look back at the very best matches the biggest wrestling event on the planet has ever produced. So we'll go through this list, and I'm keen to know if there's ones that you guys want to discuss. So the first one at number 15... I'm
just going to preface this by saying my knowledge of the tens is very weak, because that was when McMahon could do whatever he wanted, so I just don't know much about what happened in the tens. We'll skip the ones that are in the 30s, unless Taylor wants to talk about them.
No.
I don't know. That was easy.
So the first one, number 15, is Bret Hart versus Roddy Piper, WrestleMania 8.
That one's a classic. That one's really brilliant.
So we'll play... I'll cue up the little snippet of the match. That should work.
I like the lack of sound. It's really good.
Well, it doesn't work for all.
So for those at home, it's an interview where we've got Mean Gene Okerlund, who is probably the most accomplished wrestling broadcaster of all time, interviewing Roddy Piper, who at that point was the Intercontinental Champion and had been one of the major villains of the 1980s. He was Hulk Hogan's arch enemy for a while. And he's also interviewing Bret the Hitman Hart, who at that point was a major rising star in the company. And his thing was that he was a really stoic face who was just an exceptionally gifted technical wrestler. And he's a member of the illustrious Hart family, which is a real family, a real wrestling family, of Stu Hart and his sons and his uncles and nephews.
Yes. And if I could get that to...
They're really polar opposite wrestlers, because Hart he was a superb technician who was also really good at brawling, whereas but he was just average on the microphone, whereas Roddy Piper could cut amazing promos. He was terrific at getting you to hate him, but his actual in-ring abilities were not that special.
Right. Yes, so that's Bret Hart versus Roddy Piper. I'll put it over to Taylor to figure out if we can get...
So the story there was basically Roddy Piper at that point, he was getting on in years, whereas Bret Hart was rising up the ranks. And Roddy Piper had been a heel for many years, and now he's a good guy, now he's a face. So it's a face versus face match. And it starts out very respectful, but the more that it goes on, the old Roddy Piper starts coming back, because he's getting really frustrated because Bret Hart is clearly superior to him.
Yes.
And so he starts doing the old school Roddy Piper cheating maneuvers, and initially people are like, oh yeah, he's getting one up, and then he's just smacks Hart with a bunch of illegal moves, and people are getting more and more upset. And it basically, they had a conversation before the match, because they were very close. They were very close in real life. They were cousins, and Roddy Piper said to Bret Hart, "You need to get color for this to be a really special match." So getting color means that they will hide a razor blade on themselves and cut their forehead open.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They cut their foreheads. It's called blading. They cut their foreheads to bleed during a match and make it look more dramatic. So Bret Hart bladed and did it very stealthily because this was the height of the AIDS epidemic, so blading was banned.
Oh, wow, really?
And it would come with a major fine. So they had to act like it was real and he'd actually been injured and cut open by Roddy Piper when they came off stage. And
it was only later on that the truth came out.
Yes. So they had to pretend for ages it was a real injury.
Wow.
Because Ric Flair had a match at that same event, and Ric Flair was notorious for being unsubtle with his blading, and he got fined. But essentially, yeah.
And there would be pressure placed on the wrestlers to do that.
Yes.
Right? And even though they know that to ban, there'd be people arguing that this would be still good for your career if you can pull it off.
If it's written in. Yeah.
There's an old adage, red equals green. If you bleed, you make money.
Right.
Press, twist, squeeze. That's what they said.
So basically, in the match, Hart gets bloodied up, he's bleeding, he's on the floor, and Piper knocks the ref down, and he decides that he wants to end it. So he goes, one of the cliches is you get the ring bell, really big, heavy iron bell, to belt the other guy over the head. And he stands there, and he very deliberately takes his time with it, because wrestling's not a sport, it's a form of theatre.
Yes.
So he's walking towards Hart, and he's raising it over his head very slowly and deliberately, and everyone starts booing him. And then he stops, and he looks around at everyone, and you just see all this emotion on his face when he realizes what he's about to do, and how people are so disappointed with him. So he goes, all right, and he throws the bell away, and everyone cheers.
Yep.
He grabs Hart, tries to win it fair and square. Hart pins him, and he obviously, Hart wins, younger guy wins, because usually the younger guy will win because they're the future of the company. So you've got to build up your younger wrestlers, and he gets the Intercontinental belt off Roddy Piper, and it's very rare. It's very rare. It was very rare for Roddy Piper to lose cleanly in a match, because he was extremely protective of his image. Usually he'd win by getting disqualified for doing something illegal.
So Roddy Piper at this point is a heel?
He was a face. He was a good guy going in. He teased a heel turn in the ring, but people booed him so much they managed to wake him up to his senses, and he stayed a face. And they actually leave the ring arm in arm. It's really cute.
Wow. Wow.
Is he the one that, like, I know there was a wrestler who used to, like, get a chair, smack it on the ground, and then pass it to the other person, and then act like that they'd been hit with it?
No, that's Eddie Guerrero.
Ah, yeah.
So yeah, it's a really good, and the Intercontinental match was essentially, it was a belt that you'd have in the middle of the show, because obviously the main event would almost always be for the heavyweight championship, so the Intercontinental was a belt you have on in the middle of the show.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and the next one we've got at number 14 is Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar.
Oh, that one's not so much known for the match as in the ending of it.
Right.
Because there's a thing called Money in the Bank, where if you basically win a ladder match to get a briefcase, you're allowed to challenge someone for their title absolutely whenever you feel like it. So that ends with, that match has Roman Reigns beating Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar is this really huge dude who was a legitimate UFC competitor. So for many years was built up as being the ultimate villain who would just roll over everyone. So Roman Reigns beating him was a really big deal. And the thing is that Roman Reigns did really well as a heel. He was a great bad guy, but Vince McMahon decided that he wanted Roman Reigns to be the main good guy of his company. And the audience hated him.
Yeah.
Right.
They hate, because he was a member of a trio called The Shield, of which Seth Rollins was a member, the guy who ends up, we'll get to that in a moment. But people hated John Cena. Kids love John Cena, but the fans who were paying money to see events in stadiums hated John Cena. They hated Roman Reigns even more. Reigns' music hits, everyone starts booing. People despised him. They hated his wrestling ability. And so they hated his personality, the character that he played, the character that he was told to play by Vince McMahon, because wrestling fans are strange. They're always like, we don't hate him as a person. We don't even hate him as a performer, because we think he'd be a really good heel, but we hate the way that you're getting him to act. That's what we don't like. And essentially, Roman Reigns beats Brock Lesnar, which is meant to be this really great crowning moment, and everyone hates him because they're like, we really don't like this guy. And then Seth Rollins, who's previously won Money in the Bank, he cashes in Money in the Bank, storms in, pins Reigns in seconds.
Right.
Seth Rollins pins Roman Reigns in seconds, and people like Seth Rollins, so they were very happy with that outcome.
So then we go down to number 13, John Cena versus The Fiend.
Oh, now that was on. That's a match that was on during COVID. So that was a match that didn't have anyone attending.
Right. Yeah. So what happened during COVID and wrestling?
They'd still have matches, but they just wouldn't be an audience.
And was there a difference in terms of watching it at home, in terms of how that performed? Like, how important is a live audience?
Almost essential. A good audience can elevate a mediocre event. A bad audience can sink a really good event. So the
Hulk Hogan ones in Australia, for example.
Yes. So they experimented with cinematic matches around that time.
Right.
So there was the Undertaker had a really well received one against AJ Styles because Taker at that point had been trying to retire for about 10 years and he was never happy with his last match. So they full on just did a cinematic match which people loved. I believe that the Cena versus Fiend one is similar, but I've not seen it, so I can't comment on it.
Right. All right. So that's Cena versus Cena. Then they go into Gunther versus Drew McIntyre versus Sheamus.
Again, I haven't seen WrestleMania 39. I will say that Drew McIntyre is this really huge Scottish dude. Gunther, I believe, is Austrian, and he's enormous. And Sheamus is a Celtic warrior, and it's a triple threat match. Gunther's match at WrestleMania 40 was just him and Sami Zayn hitting each other in the chest with knife edge chops, like
knife edged.
A knife edge chop. It's an open palmed strike where you basically just like it's essentially a backhand, but it's open, but it's not a backhand. It's open palm. Where you slap him in the chest, and it makes a really loud noise. And it's one of those things that they used to do back in the old days. To go, look, guys, wrestling's actually real.
Yes.
And it's one of the things that survived, and no one quite knows why it survived because it obviously doesn't cause long term injuries, but it's still getting slapped in the chest hurts.
Yes. Right. 11, Randy Savage versus Ricky Steamboat.
Oh, that one. So Randy Savage, Macho Man Randy Savage, was a major wrestler from the mid 80s to sort of like the late 90s, and he was a bit of an odd duck, but was really well known for planning his matches out in advance. I've heard Steamboat talk about this because Savage passed away many years ago, where Steamboat goes that they sat down with a legal pad so that they could write stuff down, and because of the graphite, you'd be able to see it on the other page. They'd each have a copy of it, and they wrote every single step of the match out because that was in an era where most of the time you'd call matches on the fly. Every time you see guys locking up and like getting into a clinch, they're whispering directions in each other's ears.
Right.
But Steamboat talks about it. He sits down and he says, okay, so we sit down and Randy says, step 1, lock up. Well, Randy, obviously we're going to do that. Write it down, dragon. So Ricky, they plan out the whole match. They rehearse it at Savage's house several times.
Wow.
They commit the whole thing to memory. So Savage will randomly walk up to Steamboat and just say point number X, and they will quote the entire match from there. So it's basically the match itself it's odd because there's no bells and whistles. Like it's not a fancy match, but it's like greased lightning. It's so smooth.
Yep.
It is just a beautiful match to watch. It's poetry.
Wow.
And that was Ricky Steamboat gets for many years. That was actually a lot of the matches you watch today take influence from that.
Really?
Because it's no longer like that was the era of Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant, just big beefy dudes having bodybuilder pose downs and body slamming and doing very basic limited stuff. But that was all about speed and athleticism, and it was absolutely terrific. It's a brilliant match.
The article says early WrestleManias can be hard to sit through. After the ambitious stinker of a show in WrestleMania 2, we had WrestleMania 3 deliver a gigantic show worthy of the name. Outside of Hogan versus Andre the Giant in the main event, the match everyone remembers is Randy Savage defending the International Championship against Ricky Steamboat in the classic in-ring storytelling. As you're saying, that storytelling heavily choreographed. Hell, even the story going into the match is arguably better than everything else on the card. Story going into the match.
Well, because no, it's very, very rare to have a wrestler
throat injury inflicted on Steamboat.
Yeah, because normally you don't just have two guys randomly fighting at a match.
Right.
You build it up for many, many weeks or even months on the weekly TV shows and at house shows. So they spent a lot of time building this up. They'd previously wrestled where in storyline, Savage the heel injured Steamboat the face's throat. And so Steamboat was all about getting revenge.
Right. Yeah. So that was this kind of, in the article they say, treated like a borderline death, the throat injury inflicted. The two had amazing chemistry and kept a constant pace, making it a real shame that this would be the last major clash between the two due to their diverging careers.
Yeah, Steamboat ended up going back to the National Wrestling Alliance, but he did extremely well for himself there. He had a trilogy of very acclaimed matches with Ric Flair, and he ended up being a very young Steve Austin's first major arch enemy in the early 1990s.
Moving to number 10, Shawn Michaels versus Ric Flair.
That's a sad match. So Ric Flair, again, biggest wrestler, one of the biggest wrestlers of the 80s, probably second only to Hulk Hogan and maybe Randy Savage. Mm-hmm. He was their version in the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance. And at that point, he was in his late 50s. He was very over the hill. He had a lot of problems with alcohol following the death of his son. So he was sort of very prematurely aged. And he basically had been people were saying he's lost it, he's past it, he's got nothing left to give. And so he was basically he in storyline, in real life he wanted to retire. In storyline, he basically said, I'll wager my entire career on beating Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels is seen as being one of, if not the greatest in-ring talents ever in terms of his ability to do really high-flying maneuvers. He's really good at controlling a crowd. He's a terrific heel and a great face. He can do anything, basically.
And in this match, he was a heel or a face?
This was face versus face.
Really?
It was basically... Right. Shawn Michaels was talking about how Ric Flair was old yeller. He'd enjoy putting him down. And then they have this match where... people have said that Shawn Michaels can get a match out of a broom. One of the later matches on this one is Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon having the first ever ladder match. People have at WrestleMania, sorry. Everyone has said that is Shawn has a 5-star match with a ladder and Razor Ramon is also in the ring. So Shawn Michaels is really good at carrying another performer through a match. But Ric Flair people think that he basically wound the clock back 2 decades and it was like the classic Flair.
Really?
There were a bunch of moments where he put like Michaels in his classic submission move, the figure 4 leg lock, times where they thought he actually might be able to pull through. And there's this really brilliant move. The ending is really beautiful because Shawn Michaels' finishing move, super sweet chin music. It's a really high kick to the chin. It's one of the most guarded finishes ever. Like usually you get hit with that and that's the match over. He'll pin you and it's over. He hit Flair with one, pinned him, Flair kicked out. Oh, okay, everyone starts getting behind it. And there's actually this moment where Shawn knows he's going to win. Ric Flair knows he's about to lose. And Shawn does this thing where he quote unquote tunes up the band where he grabs the ring ropes and he starts stomping and everyone in the audience goes 1, 2, 3, 4. And he just has this moment where he just sort of looks over and he looks devastated. Kicks Flair again, pins him, Flair kicks out. And the very last one, he's looking at Flair and he looks absolutely distraught. And Flair's grasping his fist and he goes, come on, pull the trigger. And it's beautiful because you can't hear it, but Shawn Michaels so clearly says, I'm sorry, I love you.
Oh, wow.
Kicks him, pins him, retires him in the ring, and they have this moment of just commiseration together. And it's it's so emotional. And the following night, Ric Flair had this really beautiful farewell retirement where all of his old rivals from the 80s and 90s came out. And it's so heartwarming. And then he completely ruined it by coming out of retirement and working for another company.
Oh, wow, that's a sad epilogue. But I guess he
has a lot of ex-wives and a lot of alimony to pay.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll do the last one. We'll do number 9 is the Ultimate Warrior versus Randy Savage.
Yep, Macho Man Randy Savage again. And this is another one that he lost. Randy Savage was an interesting character because his dad was also a wrestler and his brother was a wrestler. So he was from a wrestling family and he was extremely talented, but he also understood the importance of letting other guys win so that you could elevate the business. And the Ultimate Warrior, he was a strange guy. So basically his entire thing was that he was a complete lunatic. Macho Man would say strange things, but Warrior would act like he was being possessed by the spirits of great deceased warriors. He refused when you get hit and you act like it hurts. It's called selling. Ultimate Warrior refused to sell for people. He would He would often sprint to the ring, and by the time he got there, he'd already be out of breath. So he would have a really hard time getting. He was mostly hired for his bodybuilder's physique because he had a very impressive physique, but he was just a terrible wrestler and just had an awful attitude towards the business. But basically, He and Savage, because Savage planned everything out ahead of time, they managed to plan it out, and they had all the spots worked out. He actually walks to the ring, so he conserves his energy, doesn't run out of breath in the first 10 seconds. And it's a retirement match where basically whoever loses has to retire. Retirements are usually very short in professional wrestling. Macho Man lost, but he was wrestling again within the next few months. Yeah. And it's brilliant because there's one point where Macho Man hits his signature elbow drop where he jumps off the top rope and hits the other guy, lands on the other guy with his elbow. But that actually ended up causing him huge injuries in his knees and elbows because to do it safely, you land on your knees and your elbow, and the other guy's head is between your knees and elbow. So you don't injure them. You don't injure them, but it looks like you're injuring them. But he hits Warrior with 5 elbow drops in a row. He does that 5 times, jumps off the top rope, and then Warrior kicks out, and he keeps on fighting, and he ends up pinning Macho Man. But the match itself is great because the athleticism they have and the moves that they have and the spots they do are great.
Wow.
But the actual epilogue is why that match is so fondly remembered, because Macho Man had a valet for many years called Miss Elizabeth, who in real life was Randy Savage's real life wife, Elizabeth Hewlett.
Right.
And they'd gone their separate ways 2 years ago because he turned heel and gotten together with another valet called Queen Sherry. And so at the end of the match, after he's been retired and Warrior's gone off, Queen Sherry runs into the ring and starts whacking her, starts trying to beat him up. And there have been all these shots of Miss Elizabeth in the audience looking concerned. And so she comes in and smacks Sherry, chases her off, and then she and Macho Man get reunited in the ring. And he picks her up and puts her on his shoulder. And there were fans in attendance who were literally crying because they'd been waiting 2 years for them to get back together.
So it really turned soapy.
Yeah, it's wrestling. Wrestling is a soap opera. Wrestling is not a sport. Wrestling is a soap opera that has some stage combat in it.
That's look. Sadly, we'll end on this wonderful point. We're only up to number 9, so we might, in the future, revisit this. I'll try to get audio working. I don't know. But your fantastic energy, I think, made more than up for it. So do check that out on Den of Geek, the top WrestleMania matches of all time. Any thoughts coming up in WrestleMania to...
Well, WrestleMania was like about a month and a half ago, so that's not going to come up until next year. But the next premium live event, I believe, is King and Queen of the Ring.
Yes, right.
I know that Logan Paul is challenging because Logan
Paul, or the YouTuber.
Yeah, he's been a member of the WWE for about a couple of years now.
He's actually quite good.
He's the heavyweight champion, and he is terrific in the ring.
Really?
He's a natural heel. He knows people hate him, and he plays it up so much. And he's a really good athlete. So he's challenging Cody Rhodes for in a title unification match. So because he's the US champion and Cody Rhodes is the undisputed champion, and it's going to be
wow. He's Logan Paul's also done like boxing as well.
Yep.
But that's meant to be not theatrical.
Well, boxing's actually a sport, but there's a lot of ex-boxers and ex-UFC fighters, ex-MMA fighters actually go on to become wrestlers because 1, it's safer, 2, you can do more of it, and 3, the pay is acceptable.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So yes, keep your eyes open on that. We might come back to discuss the impact of that match in the future. This has been Media Mothership, a wonderful deep dive. Thank you, Lord Taylor and MC Dent. And MC Dent, you were saying the Tazpop quiz is tomorrow night. So if you're local in Hobart and you're keen to test your popular culture knowledge, come along. Are there tickets at the door?
Yep, 7 p.m. at the Republic Bar and Cafe.
7
upstairs.
p.m. Republic Bar and Cafe, Tazpop quiz. If you want to know more about it, you can go onto Facebook.
Yep.
Just search for Tazpop quiz.
Yep, at the Republic.
At the Republic. Great. Well, excellent to have you on again. All the best with the quiz tomorrow. Coming up next, we've got K-Pop Unlimited. Any hooks to get people into K-Pop Unlimited?
We're playing illegal North Korean songs.
Oh, great. Well, yeah. Yes. And I'm... Yep, we're going to unpack propaganda.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, keep listening to Edge Radio 99.3 FM.